First of all, before I get going here, I want to say thank you to Way of the Bastard for your response. And another thing, just a note here on the title of your video. I hate the free will defense. I don't think Murray's response is best classified as a version of the free will defense, as I think Longhorn Man pointed out in the comment section. Murray's saying that divine revelation in some cases would impede moral development. And I'll quote him here a couple times. The function of this earthly life, a time during which we are capable of making free choices between moral good and evil courses of action, is to have the opportunity to develop morally significant characters. End quote. And quoting him again, thus we might say that the function of the earthly life is soul-making, and that a necessary condition for soul-making is morally significant libertarian freedom. Libertarian freedom alone will not do here, since the point of character development is that one has the opportunity to choose good or evil, end quote. And so I think this response is best classified as Murray thinks it is, as a soul-making defense or theodicy, even though there are similarities between the two. And so now I'm just going to quote you on some of your main objections and respond that way. Quote, my first objection is that there is no compelling reason to assume, even if we do grant Murray's concept of TI, that all reasonable non-believers fall into this category. Murray has given no compelling reason to assume that this is true, and in my estimation it seems wildly improbable. On these grounds alone, I think we can safely reject Murray's argument. I agree that Murray has not given reasons in those essays that all non-culpable non-believers have low threat-indifference, TI. So I don't think his response, as is, works to defeat Schellenbergs' second premise in the original argument in Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason, which states that if God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. But despite this, I'll still defend parts of his response to other criticisms he had. Cool. It seems nearly impossible to imagine that God would actualize people who he is unable to reveal himself to. How could this possibly be of benefit to them? If the only reason God created us is to have a relationship with him, actualizing individuals who, due to their reasonableness and low TI, are unable to come into a relationship with him would not make any sense. This would mean that God is making defective people who, through no fault or conscious decision of their own, are unable to connect with him. This is inconsistent and even at odds with an all-loving God. Agreed. But I think Murray's conception of TI, from what he says about it, however minimal that is, doesn't commit him to this view that TI in a person is unalterable. Even that God created people who had initially low TI. He says that it's, quote, a character trait that we, in some measure, freely cultivate, unquote. So perhaps, in order to raise TI, one needs to act slightly braver each time one is in a threatening situation. After a while, one's TI will be high enough that they'll be able to take in a revelation from God. Cool. This argument fails to account for people who are non-resistant in their non-belief and have already made the only relevant moral choice that God really cares about, that being that they have not chosen to reject God. End quote. A couple of points here. First, the argument does specifically aim at those who are non-resistant in their non-belief. Reasonable being synonymous with non-resistant. Another thing, by the second part of the statement, I take it that you're saying that if a person has not chosen to reject God, God would make himself known to them. That seems to me to be similar to Schellenberg's second premise in the original argument, non-culpable non-belief being replaced with one's not having chosen to reject God. Another objection, quote, theistically unwarranted. What about Paul on the road to Damascus? Is God unconcerned with his free will? End quote. Paul, if Murray is right about the nature of coercion, very likely had high TI. Consider all the potentially coercive situations, threats of injury and possible death he went through after his conversion. This is a sign that, if Murray is right, he had high TI all along. Quote, all of this leads me to my strongest point. Can making decisions on the basis of consequences really be considered coercion? Is this really the direction that Murray wants to argue? Let's examine one of Murray's examples, the examples Murray gives, and see if it really follows that he's describing coercion. Murray uses the example of two prisoners contemplating an escape attempt from prison. Both feel they have a 50-50 chance at escape, but that if they fail, they will be mortally wounded by guards. Murray argues that we can imagine that one prisoner may be willing to attempt the escape, as he is willing to chance the odds, and we can imagine that one prisoner is unwilling to attempt the escape. Now Murray argues that this second prisoner is being coerced by the threat of death not to attempt to escape. But is this really how we should interpret the situation? I think no. Wouldn't it be more accurate, certainly with the presumption of libertarian free will, that the second prisoner simply made a rational free decision not to attempt the escape based on the potential consequence of being killed? I don't feel that Murray has made a strong case for coercion at all. In fact, I think that given his belief in free will, what he is really describing is a rational decision based on consequences, end quote. First of all, it seems that your comments would lead you to exclude from the concept of coercion acts that were based on deliberation. You think the prisoner in the example is just performing a, quote, rational decision based on consequences, and thus it's apparently not a coerced act. But many clear-cut cases of coercion have this feature of deliberation. Take a modified example of Murray's. I'm walking on the street in the middle of the night when someone comes up from behind me and sticks a cylindrical object in my back, claiming that if I don't hand over my money I'll be shot. Just because I deliberate for a second in my mind, asking myself if that really is a gun in my back, doesn't mean I wasn't coerced. Second, it's disputed whether coerced acts can be free. But the assumption, which I find highly probable, is that even if some are free, they aren't morally significant. Quote, Murray seems to be arguing that a prior state of affairs X will always lead to a future state of affairs Y, and this is practically the definition of determinism. Murray's argument seems to be saying that all people have predetermined characteristics that will result in different sets of possible behavior on the basis of unchosen mental states. Because these people did not pick these characteristics, and these characteristics have an absolute impact on their future behavior, then it would seem that Murray is arguing for free will via determinism, end quote. Well, as mentioned earlier, Murray does say that one's TI level is freely cultivated by us. But then you say, quote, I am not sure how one could argue that an individual decides their own TI, threat-indifference, end quote. As mentioned earlier, Murray doesn't specify exactly how this could be the case, so I made a little suggestion as to how this might work. And the last objection I'll deal with. Quote, if Murray believes that certain knowledge will lead to coerced behavior, then it would almost certainly seem that Murray is not a proponent of libertarian free will, end quote. Certainty of the consequences of actions on Murray's model would be the highest possible level of probabilistic imminence, which we know is just one of the relevant factors that determine whether an act is coerced or not. And again, not all think, I'm not sure even Murray thinks this, that coerced acts can't be free. Finally, and also again, Murray is only assuming the intuitively plausible view that coerced acts are not morally significant.